My name is Nora Hawthorne. I'm 68 years old, a retired accountant from Portland, Oregon. Numbers used to be my comfort. They told the truth, even when people didn't. After my husband passed, I learned to live quietly, budgeting both my days and my emotions. This morning was supposed to be a rare break from that routine. My son, Ryan, had planned a trip for the three of us. A family vacation, he called it. He said I needed the rest. I believed him. The terminal smelled of coffee and jet fuel, that strange mix of excitement and farewell. I rolled my small blue suitcase behind me, the same one I'd used on my honeymoon. Ryan walked ahead, tall and brisk, his wife Elena trailing behind, eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. She smiled when I caught her glance, but it was the kind of smile that disappears before it reaches the eyes. We reached the check-in counter. Ryan was talking fast, as he always did when he was nervous. I stood a few feet away, checking my boarding pass. I heard a sharp sound, plastic hitting tile. His suitcase had slipped from the counter, landing hard. The latch burst open. A few shirts tumbled out. Then a manila envelope slid across the floor, stopping near my shoes. It was labeled neatly in black ink. N. Hawthorne. Personal Affairs. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. My hand reached down automatically. Inside, I saw the corner of an insurance form, my name typed across the top, my signature. Only it wasn't mine. Beneath it, a bottle of pills rolled out. My medication. Or something that looked like it. But the label was wrong. I froze. Everything around me went silent. The crowd noise faded, replaced by the steady pulse in my ears. I didn't gasp, didn't speak. I simply slid the envelope back into the suitcase, shut the latch, and placed my palm on top as if to steady it. Ryan turned, startled. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, forcing a laugh. I looked at him. "We're not flying anywhere," I said quietly. He blinked, confused. "What?" I turned to the check-in clerk and smiled politely. "We need to cancel the trip," I said. "Something's come up." The clerk nodded, unsure. Ryan's face drained of color. Elena reached for his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. I just stood there, calm on the outside, trembling inside. I could feel the heat rise in my throat, the taste of something bitter that wasn't quite fear yet. He opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand slightly. "Let's go home, Ryan. We'll talk there." He didn't move for a moment. His eyes flickered, a mixture of anger and something else. Panic, maybe. Then he grabbed the handle of his suitcase, the one I had just closed, and followed me toward the exit. The automatic doors opened, letting in the cool air from the drop-off lane. For a second, the sound of an airplane taking off filled the space between us. I could almost feel the vibration through the floor, the deep hum of something massive leaving the ground. I imagined what might have happened if we had boarded that flight. In the car, no one spoke. The silence was heavier than the suitcase resting between us. I stared out the window, the reflection of my own face pale and steady. My hands were folded neatly on my lap, but my pulse betrayed me. Sometimes, the quietest moments are the loudest, and sometimes, survival begins with a single breath. Before I continue, I should say this. If you've ever doubted your own instincts, don't. They're the only compass that never lies. What happened after that morning changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the thin line between trust and danger. When we reached home, Ryan parked without a word. He walked inside first, slamming the door harder than he needed to. Elena lingered near the car, looking down, her fingers shaking slightly as she adjusted her scarf. I wanted to ask her what she knew, but I stayed silent. Not yet. Inside the house, the air felt wrong, too still, too careful. Ryan's voice came from the kitchen. "Mom, I don't understand what's going on," he said, his tone rehearsed. I set my purse on the table. "Neither do I answered, though I already did. He tried to smile. "You've been working too hard lately. Maybe this is just stress." I looked at him, really looked. The man who once called me every night from college to ask about his taxes now couldn't meet my eyes. His collar was damp with sweat. "I'm fine," I said, "but we'll stay home this week. No flights, no risks." He stared at me for a long time, jaw tightening. "Suit yourself." Then he walked out, leaving the faint smell of cologne and something metallic behind. Elena stepped in a minute later. "Mrs. Hawthorne, maybe we can talk later?" she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly on the word talk. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Later." When they left, I sat down at the table and opened my phone. My fingers hovered over the contacts before pressing Grace Porter. Grace had been my friend for 30 years, the kind of woman who still sent postcards and kept every receipt. She was a travel agent, meticulous and loyal. "Grace, it's Nora," I said when she picked up. "Can you check something for me? The policy linked to our flight booking. I just need to make sure it's correct." She hesitated. "Sure. Anything wrong?" "Maybe, just a feeling." Grace chuckled softly. "You always said numbers don't have feelings." "They do," I said. "You just have to listen closely." After the call ended, I sat there, staring at the clock. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the second hand. Each sound felt amplified, as if reminding me I was still here, alive for now. I looked at my suitcase, still standing by the door. The zipper was slightly bent from the fall. I reached over, ran my finger along the seam, and whispered to myself, "Habit keeps me alive." Outside, another plane lifted into the sky. I watched its silver body disappear into the clouds and wondered how many stories begin the moment someone decides not to leave. The next morning, sunlight fell through the blinds in thin, perfect lines. It should have been the day of our trip, but instead of airport chatter, the house held an uneasy stillness. I made coffee as I always did. 2 scoops, 1 cup, no sugar. The habit steadied me. Across the table, Ryan scrolled through his phone, pretending not to notice that I was watching him. "I called the airline," he said without looking up. "They said the tickets aren't refundable." "That's all right," I replied, my voice soft. "Some things are worth more than refunds." He looked up then, suspicious. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled faintly. "Just that we're safe. And safe is priceless." His jaw tightened. He muttered something under his breath and left the table. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hall, replaced by the soft rhythm of my own breathing. For a woman who had built her life on logic and order, I suddenly realized I was walking a fine edge between reason and fear. Elena appeared at the kitchen doorway, her hair tied loosely, her eyes swollen from a sleepless night. "Would you like me to make you breakfast, Mrs. Hawthorne?" "No, dear," I said. "Sit down a moment." She hesitated, then sat. Her hands were clasped together, white at the knuckles. "Ryan said you felt unwell yesterday," she said carefully. "Maybe the flight. Maybe it just wasn't the right time." Her voice trembled ever so slightly. I studied her face, the faint bruise under her left eye, carefully hidden by makeup. My heart clenched, but I stayed quiet. "You're right," I said finally. "It wasn't." She nodded, as if relieved that I didn't ask more. I let the silence fill the space between us until the sound of a car starting outside broke it. Ryan had left. When I was sure he wouldn't return soon, I took my phone and called Grace again. "Nora, I checked the booking," she said, her voice lower than usual. "There's something odd. Your flight insurance. There's a supplemental policy attached to your name. A big one." My fingers tightened around the phone. "How big?" $1.8 million, she said. "Issued 2 weeks ago. Ryan's name is listed as beneficiary." I closed my eyes. "Grace, I never signed anything." "I figured. Do you want me to look deeper?" "Yes," I whispered. "And please don't tell anyone, not even your husband. Just trust your instinct." Grace sighed softly. "That line sounds familiar." "I learned it from you," I said, forcing a small laugh. When the call ended, I stayed still for a long time, staring at the pattern of light on the kitchen table. I remembered teaching Ryan about compound interest when he was 10, how he used to ask what would happen if numbers could lie. I told him they couldn't. Now, I wasn't sure. By late afternoon, he returned home, pretending everything was normal. He dropped his keys on the counter and smiled too easily. "Feeling better, Mom?" "Much," I said. "I made soup." He poured himself a glass of water. "You know, maybe next month we can try again, somewhere closer." "That sounds nice," I replied. My voice was steady, but inside, I was calculating. Time, money, opportunity. I noticed his phone buzzing on the counter, the name Calvin R. flashing briefly before he grabbed it. His tone dropped to a low murmur as he stepped outside to take the call. I leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on the window. Elena was in the garden, trimming the roses I'd planted years ago. She moved slowly, almost carefully, as if afraid to make a mistake. When Ryan came back in, he was all smiles again. "Business call," he said, tucking his phone into his pocket. "Of course," I answered. That evening, while he and Elena watched television, I sat at my desk pretending to go through old tax papers. My pulse was steady now, my mind sharper than it had been in years. I looked at the framed photo of Ryan as a child, gap-toothed and proud, holding a model airplane. He had built it with his father. I wondered if that memory still meant anything to him. I opened my ledger notebook, the same one I used before retirement, and began writing a list. Verify policy date. Contact Martin Wells. Secure digital backup. Observe Elena's behavior. Each number was a promise to myself. I had spent decades keeping others' finances clean. Now I had to clean my own life. Before going to bed, I walked past Ryan's room. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear him whispering into his phone. The tone was tense, clipped. "No, she didn't suspect anything," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out. Just not now." I stepped back, holding my breath, the hallway light flickering faintly above me. For a moment, I considered walking in, confronting him, asking why my name was on that document. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I went back to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The same suitcase stood by my dresser, still half-packed. I reached for it and traced the zipper with my fingers. It caught the light just enough to glint like a warning. Tomorrow, I thought, the numbers will start to speak. The night stretched on. Every sound in the house, the ticking clock, the faint hum of the heater, the distant traffic, felt too loud, like the world itself was holding its breath with me. If I had learned anything from a lifetime of audits, it was this: every lie leaves a trail, and when the trail leads home, you follow it quietly. The morning began with rain, soft, steady, the kind that fills every silence without asking for permission. I sat by the window, coffee in hand, watching the drops slide down the glass. Ryan had left early, claiming he had a meeting in the city. Elena said she would visit her sister, though her voice carried the unease of someone escaping, not visiting. I was alone, finally, and that gave me room to breathe. The phone buzzed on the table. Grace. "I did a deeper check," she said as soon as I picked up. "The insurance policy, there's more to it." I pressed the mug to my lips, hiding the tremor in my hand. "Tell me." "It was added as a rider to your travel package, which is normal, but the payment was made through a corporate card under Ryan's name. I also found the policy approval date, issued 3 days after his company filed for an internal audit." I exhaled slowly. So he's desperate. "It looks that way. Nora, you need to be careful." "I always am," I said. "Can you send me the document?" "Already did. Check your email." I opened my old laptop, the one that still hummed like a tired bee. There it was, Grace's message with attachments. The PDF opened to reveal my name typed neatly beside the words "insured party." The digital signature was a perfect imitation. Too perfect. I had balanced enough books in my life to know forged precision when I saw it. Scrolling through the details, my stomach tightened. It wasn't just a travel insurance plan. It was a comprehensive life coverage clause triggered by accidental death during flight. Beneficiary, Ryan Hawthorne. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. After a few minutes, I called Martin Wells. He was one of the few people from my old accounting firm I still trusted. He had a sharp mind and a gentle way of speaking, the kind that made even ugly truths sound manageable. "Martin, it's Nora," I began. "I need your help. It's about Ryan." He sighed, a long, thoughtful sound. "I figured this wasn't a social call. What's happened?" "There's an insurance policy in my name. Forged signature. Huge amount. It's tied to a flight we were supposed to take yesterday." There was a pause. "Do you have the documents?" "Yes, I'll send them." "Nora, before you do anything else, back everything up. Twice. Cloud storage, USB, whatever you can. If the policy exists, there'll be financial traces, premium payments, underwriting files, correspondence. Follow the numbers, not the emotions." I smiled faintly. "You always said numbers don't lie." "They don't," he said. "But people behind them do." After the call, I printed the documents, laid them on the table, and began to study them the way I once studied ledgers for discrepancies, payment routing, agent identification code, timestamps, the company name, North Star Financial Holdings. I underlined it. Something about it sounded familiar. When I typed the name into a search bar, the first result was a headline from 2 years ago, North Star Broker, under investigation for elder policy fraud. My heart slowed. Beneath the headline, a name appeared in small text. Calvin Reese, senior agent. I didn't know him, but I remembered hearing Ryan mention someone named Calvin once in passing when talking about restructuring assets. The rain outside grew heavier, matching the weight in my chest. By noon, Grace called again. "Nora, are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," I said softly. "Do me one more favor. Pull Ryan's company filings for me. See if there's any sign of financial distress." "You think he's in trouble?" "I think he's drowning," I replied. "And he's reaching for the nearest lifeline." "Which is you." "Yes," I whispered. After she hung up, I stared at the table covered in papers. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, older, sharper. It struck me that maybe Ryan didn't see me as a mother anymore, just a line item on his balance sheet. That evening, he came home in unusually high spirits. "Mom," he said, dropping his coat on the chair, "I talked to Elena's cousin about another trip next month. Something local, safe, relaxing." "That sounds thoughtful," I replied, folding the papers discreetly. "You're full of surprises lately." He laughed lightly. "Just trying to make things right after yesterday." "Of course," I said. "We all make mistakes." He didn't notice how my hand hovered protectively over the folder on the table. He didn't notice how my eyes followed every small movement he made. He had no idea I already knew what he had done. After he went upstairs, I placed the folder in a locked drawer and sat back, breathing in the quiet. For years, I had believed that aging meant slowing down, softening. But sitting there, surrounded by evidence, I felt something else. A quiet precision returning to me. The same focus I once had when catching fraud buried deep in financial reports. The only difference now was that the fraud wore my son's smile. I turned off the light and looked out the window one last time. The rain had stopped, but water still clung to the glass in delicate lines, distorting the streetlights outside. Every drop looked like a trail waiting to be followed, and I intended to follow it, all the way. The next day unfolded with the strange calm that often precedes a storm. Ryan left early again, claiming a meeting with investors. Elena stayed behind, saying she needed to organize the household bills. I moved quietly through the morning, the rhythm of routine keeping me steady. But beneath that stillness, my mind was already tracing lines, connecting the dots between the policy, the money, and the man I used to call my son. I decided to take a walk, to clear my head. The air outside smelled of wet pavement and pine. Ryan's car was parked in the driveway, sleek and silent. Something on the passenger seat caught my eye. A small flash drive, silver, unmarked. It might have meant nothing to anyone else, but years of auditing had taught me that nothing left in plain sight was ever accidental. I hesitated, then looked around. The street was empty. My fingers curled around the door handle. It was unlocked. I picked up the USB and slipped it into my pocket, heart thudding just once before settling into a slow, careful rhythm. Back inside, I set the device on the kitchen table. It was small enough to disappear between my fingertips, yet heavy in its implication. I waited until the house was silent before plugging it into my old laptop. The screen flickered, then opened to a folder titled simply Documents. The first file was a string of emails. I clicked the top one. From Ryan Hawthorne to Calvin Reese. Subject: Confirmation before flight. The email was short. Everything is set. She thinks it's just a trip. You'll get the transfer once the claim clears. Don't screw this up. My throat tightened. The next message was worse. Detailed instructions about medication, dosage, and timing. My name appeared more than once. I clicked through them one by one, each line a small fracture in the foundation of everything I believed about motherhood. Halfway down the list, I saw a document labeled Certificate. It was a mock-up of a death certificate. My name printed cleanly across the top. Cause of death: cardiac arrest, in flight. The date was the day we were meant to travel. I sat very still. The room around me faded. The hum of the refrigerator became the only sound anchoring me to the present. For a long time, I couldn't move. Then my body remembered how to breathe. I copied every file onto a new drive, encrypting it with the precision of habit. When the process finished, I unplugged the USB, wiped its history, and placed it in an envelope marked with today's date. I knew better than to confront him yet. Confrontation ends things too quickly. I needed understanding. I needed proof that would survive denial. Martin called just as I sealed the envelope. "Did you find anything?" he asked. "Enough," I said. My voice sounded older, colder. Emails between Ryan and someone named Calvin Reese. They mention a transfer, a claim, a death certificate with my name on it. Martin was silent for several seconds. "Nora, that's attempted insurance fraud, possibly attempted homicide, if the plan was active. You need to document everything, chain of custody included. I can help you organize the files properly." "I'll bring them tomorrow," I said. "Good. Don't tell Ryan you found it. Not yet. Let's make this clean." After the call, I stared at the laptop screen, still open to a folder full of betrayal. I scrolled to one final file, an image attachment. It showed a bank transfer, $50,000 from Ryan's corporate account to C. Reese Holdings. The memo line read, "Consulting Services." My hand shook slightly as I took a photo of the screen with my phone, saving another copy in the cloud. I wasn't just an old woman anymore. I was an accountant again, tracking the numbers, following the patterns, doing what I had always done best, finding truth buried in the balance. Later, when Ryan returned, I was sitting on the porch, pretending to read. He greeted me with his usual charm, asking about dinner plans, speaking too quickly. I smiled and nodded at the right times, the same way I used to when clients lied to me across a desk. After he went inside, I stayed where I was, letting the air cool around me. A breeze lifted a few pages of the newspaper beside me. The headlines blurred, letters bleeding together until they looked like numbers. I thought about the file I'd seen, the clean lines of the forged certificate, how sterile and final it was. Death on paper always looks tidy. Life never does. As the sky darkened, I slipped the envelope with the USB copy into the lining of my handbag. Then I turned off my porch light, leaving the house dim except for one lamp in the living room. From outside, it would look like someone had fallen asleep with a book open. Inside, I locked the front door and stood there for a long time, listening. Ryan's voice drifted faintly from upstairs. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone. Sharp, impatient. The same tone he used to argue with his father years ago. I walked to my husband's old desk and opened the top drawer. The faint smell of cedar and paper filled the air. Inside was his ring, polished smooth by time. I turned it in my fingers, its weight grounding me. He would have known what to do. He always did. When I finally went to bed, I placed the ring beside my phone. The house was silent, but my mind was awake, tracing every detail, every decimal point of betrayal. I knew that in the morning, the plan would begin to take shape, not one of vengeance, but of order, proof, and quiet justice. The kind of justice that leaves no fingerprints. I met Martin the next morning at his home office, a quiet place filled with shelves of old ledgers, leather-bound manuals, and the faint scent of coffee and paper. He greeted me with a slow, deliberate smile, the kind of expression that carried both empathy and calculation. We'd worked side by side for decades, uncovering corporate fraud long before digital evidence was a common phrase. If anyone could help me map the truth cleanly, it was him. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You brought the files?" I handed him the envelope. "Everything I could find. Emails, documents, a transfer image. I copied and encrypted them." He nodded, impressed. "You never lose your touch, Nora." "Old habits," I said softly. "They keep me alive." He inserted the USB into his computer, the screen lighting his face with pale blue. Line by line, he scrolled through the emails, reading in silence. When he reached the death certificate, he leaned back, rubbing his temple. This isn't amateur work. Whoever forged this knows exactly how to replicate metadata. Calvin, I said. That's the name in the emails. Calvin Reese, Martin repeated, typing quickly. I remember him from a compliance seminar years ago. Left the industry under investigation. He's been linked to 3 other cases of elder policy fraud. None went to trial. Lack of direct evidence. So Ryan found the perfect partner, I murmured. He glanced at me. Nora, this is going to hurt more before it gets better. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I'm sure, I said. If I stop now, I'll only have suspicion. If I continue, I'll have truth. He nodded. Then let's make it undeniable. For the next hour, we worked side by side. Martin traced the bank transfer metadata, noting timestamps and routing codes. Here, he said, pointing at the screen. The $50,000 transfer went through a shell account registered to a firm called Horizon Management. That's Calvin's front company. It's been used to move small sums, consulting fees, reimbursements, but if we map the IP logs, they all originate from the same device. I followed his words, my mind ticking like clockwork. Meaning we can prove coordination. Exactly. He paused, turning toward me. But we'll need independent verification. If this ever goes to court, your word and my analysis won't be enough. I have someone who can help, I said. Grace. She has contacts at the airport. She mentioned a security officer named Miles Graham. Maybe he can pull CCTV footage. Martin's eyes brightened. Perfect. If Miles can confirm Ryan and Calvin met near the terminal or exchanged anything, it solidifies intent. He printed several pages of the digital trail, stapling them carefully. This is how we'll build the timeline, he said, handing me a copy. Money flow, communication, opportunity. It all converges before the day of the flight. I studied the papers, my own handwriting joining his notes. For the first time since the airport, I felt something sharper than fear. Focus. When we paused for coffee, Martin leaned back in his chair. You know, I remember Ryan as a boy running around your office, asking how numbers could be wrong. I smiled faintly. He learned too well that they could be bent, just not broken. He nodded slowly. What's your next move? I'll act normal, I said. He needs to think the plan is still intact. The more comfortable he feels, the more careless he'll become. That's dangerous, Martin warned. I've been in danger since the suitcase opened, I replied. This is just me catching up. Before I left, Martin handed me a small black flash drive. Duplicate of everything, he said. Keep one at home, one somewhere safe. If anything happens, this goes directly to Detective Harper Quinn at the local precinct. She's trustworthy. Tell her I sent you. I slipped it into my purse. Thank you, Martin. He smiled. You don't have to thank me. You're doing what you've always done, balancing an account. Only this time, the numbers have blood in them. The drive felt heavy against the lining of my bag as I walked to the car. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that made everything look temporary. I called Grace on the way home. Grace, can you get in touch with Miles? The security officer you mentioned. She hesitated. Of course. What do you need? Footage, I said simply. From the airport on the day of the canceled flight. I think Ryan met someone there. I'll make some calls, she promised. And Nora, whatever this is, you're not alone. I know, I said quietly. Thank you. When I reached home, Ryan's car was gone. The house felt oddly warm, as if it had exhaled while he was away. I placed the documents in my desk drawer, locking it with the same key I'd kept since my first job. Then I sat down and wrote a short list on a yellow pad. Coordinate with Grace and Miles. Prepare secure backups. Maintain normal behavior. Invite Ryan and Elena for dinner. The last line lingered longest under my pen. Dinner had always been our family's peace offering, a way to pretend things were fine. This time, it would serve another purpose. I placed the notepad beside my husband's ring. The light caught the metal and cast a faint circle on the desk. Small, steady, unbroken. For the first time in days, I smiled. Quietly, but truly. Because now the pieces were falling into place. And I knew that soon the truth would have nowhere left to hide. I set the table the way my husband used to like it. Linen cloth, candles trimmed low, silverware perfectly aligned. It was the kind of detail Ryan used to tease me about, saying I treated dinner like an audit. He wasn't wrong. Tonight, every fork and plate had a purpose. Every light, every pause, every word would be measured. Grace called earlier to confirm that Miles had agreed to help. He would pull the airport CCTV records quietly, no questions asked. Martin had already filed the document authentication request under a neutral firm name. The plan was in motion, though no one would have guessed it from the calm inside my kitchen. When Ryan and Elena arrived, the first thing I noticed was the tension between them. He carried himself with forced confidence, the swagger of a man trying too hard. She looked smaller than usual, her shoulders drawn inward, her smile practiced. "Smells good, Mom," Ryan said, setting down a bottle of wine. "Figured we should celebrate staying on the ground for once." "Ground feels safer these days," I said, keeping my tone light. Elena placed her purse by the door and went to help in the kitchen. As she reached for a tray, her sleeve slipped just enough for me to see the faint bruise on her wrist. It wasn't fresh, but it hadn't healed either. She caught me looking and quickly pulled the sleeve back down. I handed her a bowl. "Accident?" She shook her head. "Clumsy," she whispered. Ryan walked in just then. "Everything okay?" "Just catching up," I said smoothly. "Dinner's ready." We sat down, the three of us, the air thick with polite silence. The candles flickered, throwing soft shadows on the tablecloth. I poured the wine and offered a toast. "To family," Ryan said, raising his glass before I could speak. "To taking care of each other." His smile was tight, his eyes unblinking. I met his gaze and nodded. "To that," I said softly. I lifted my glass, but didn't drink. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her fork. The sound of silver on porcelain filled the silence between us. "So," Ryan said after a moment, "any new plans for travel? Maybe something domestic? We could go to California, visit the vineyards." "I'm done flying for a while," I said. "But thank you." He shrugged, cutting into his steak. "You've always been cautious, sometimes too cautious." "Caution keeps people alive," I replied. He smiled faintly, but his jaw tightened. "You always think someone's out to get you." "Not always," I said. "Only when I see evidence." The room fell quiet again. He looked at me with that same careful charm he used when pitching investors, the kind that masked impatience. "I know you were upset about the trip," he said finally. "But I was just trying to do something nice. For you." "I know," I said. "And I appreciate it. I really do." I leaned back, pretending to relax. "Speaking of nice things, you're still taking those supplements, right? The ones for your blood pressure?" He frowned slightly. "Of course. Why?" "Oh, just curious. I started double-checking mine lately. Pills look the same, but sometimes they change the formula without notice. You'd be surprised what people can slip into a bottle these days. The air thinned. Ryan froze for half a second before forcing a laugh. You really do worry too much, Mom. I smiled. Habit, I guess. Across the table, Elena's eyes flickered up to mine. Just for an instant. Guilt, fear, or both. I changed the subject, asking about his business. He launched into a story about a new contract, using words like growth projection and capital recovery. I listened, nodding at all the right moments, but my mind was elsewhere. On the documents Martin was authenticating, on the footage Miles might already have, on Grace waiting for my signal. Halfway through dinner, Ryan excused himself to take a call. Elena sat still, staring at her plate. You don't have to pretend, I said quietly. Her eyes filled before she could blink them dry. I didn't want any of this, she whispered. He said it was just temporary. That once the claim went through, everything would be fine. My throat tightened. Fine for who? She covered her mouth, shaking her head. Please don't tell him I said anything. I won't, I said. Not yet. Ryan returned a minute later, cheerful again, as if nothing had passed between us. He poured more wine, filling my glass almost to the brim. To family, he repeated, his voice smoother now. I touched my glass to his, but didn't drink. The candlelight flickered against the rim, throwing a small glint of red into his eyes. For the rest of the evening, we ate and spoke about ordinary things. Neighbors, old memories, the weather. But underneath it all, there was a new rhythm to the silence, a conversation running parallel to the words. When they left, I stood by the window and watched their car back out of the driveway. Elena glanced toward the house one last time, her face pale in the headlights. Ryan didn't notice. I closed the curtains and exhaled slowly. My hands were steady. My pulse wasn't. The plates still sat on the table. The candles burned low, and the half-empty bottle of wine reflected the light like a wound. It was a dinner of lies, but it told me everything I needed to know. Ryan wasn't just desperate. He was certain I was still blind, and that certainty would be his mistake. 2 days later, Ryan called unexpectedly. His voice was unusually calm, careful. Mom, I've been thinking, maybe we got off on the wrong foot with the whole trip thing. Why don't we start fresh? I found a senior living community nearby that offers short stays. It might give you some peace of mind when I travel. For a moment, I said nothing. His words sounded rehearsed, polished. That's thoughtful, I replied. When would you like to go? Tomorrow, he said, almost too quickly. They have open tours on weekends. I smiled faintly at the phone, unseen. All right, let's do that. When I hung up, I sat very still. Martin's papers lay open on the desk beside me, the ink from his notes still fresh. The policy, the forged signature, the money trail, and now, this invitation. I had no doubt he was arranging another layer of control, but control works both ways. The next morning, the air smelled like autumn rain. Ryan picked me up in his car, Elena in the back seat. She looked fragile, her gaze fixed on the window. I caught her reflection in the glass, the quiet sorrow of someone living with a secret too heavy to keep. The drive was long and winding, through pine-lined roads that curved around the edge of the city. Ryan talked the entire time about stability, finances, safety. I listened, answering only when I had to. He needed the illusion of compliance, and I gave it to him. When we arrived, the building looked more like a country club than a care home. White columns, trimmed hedges, a fountain shaped like a swan. Inside, everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and lilies. A young woman at the reception desk greeted us with a bright smile. "Mr. Hawthorne, welcome back," she said. "Glad you could make it again." Ryan froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled tightly. "Of course. Just wanted to show my mother the place this time." Again, the words slid through my mind like a blade. I kept my face neutral. The receptionist led us through the lounge area, talking about activities, medical support, estate management services. I followed behind, nodding at the right moments. Ryan was animated, gesturing toward the garden and dining hall as if he already owned them. Elena stayed quiet, walking a few steps behind us. As we passed a doorway marked Resident Services, a staff member stepped out carrying a clipboard. He recognized Ryan instantly. "Oh, Mr. Hawthorne, we're still processing the paperwork you dropped off last week. You'll get confirmation soon." Ryan's smile faltered. "Of course," he said quickly. "Thank you." The staffer nodded and moved on. I stopped walking. "Paperwork?" I asked lightly. "Just preliminary stuff," Ryan said. "You know, reservations, medical preferences, all that." "Medical preferences?" I repeated, my voice soft but steady. "Standard forms, Mom. Don't worry about it." I looked at him, studying the faint sheen of sweat above his lip. He couldn't meet my eyes. "You've always been thorough," I said finally. "I admire that." He exhaled, relieved, mistaking my calm for surrender. The rest of the tour passed in polite conversation. The rooms were immaculate, the staff overly cheerful. Everything looked designed to comfort families, not residents. As we left, the receptionist handed me a brochure with soft pastel colors and smiling faces. I slipped it into my purse without looking. In the car, Ryan said, "I just want you to have options, Mom, in case something happens." "Something always does," I said quietly. He laughed awkwardly. "I mean, you never know what the future holds." "I do," I said. "I've seen enough of it." Elena turned her head sharply toward me, her eyes full of something like fear. I looked back at her in the rearview mirror, meeting her gaze long enough for her to understand that I knew. She looked away quickly, her hand clutching her purse like a lifeline. When we reached home, Ryan helped me out of the car. "I'll call tomorrow," he said. "We'll go over some paperwork together, okay?" "Of course," I said, smiling faintly. He drove away, tires hissing softly on wet asphalt. The sound lingered long after the car disappeared down the street. Inside, I placed the brochure on the table and opened it. A section on estate transition programs caught my eye. It mentioned asset management support for families in the event of unexpected passing. At the bottom of the page was a familiar logo, North Star Financial Holdings. I let the brochure fall closed. It wasn't just a plan to control my life. It was a contingency for my death. That evening, I called Martin and told him everything. The receptionist's slip, the paperwork, the company logo. He listened quietly, then said, "He's not improvising anymore. He's executing." "Then we stay one step ahead," I replied. "Are you still planning to gather evidence through Miles?" "Yes," I said. "And I need Elena to talk. She's the key." "Careful, Nora. Fear can make people unpredictable." "I know," I said. "But guilt can make them brave." When I hung up, I walked to my bedroom window. The night outside was heavy and windless. Somewhere in the distance, a plane passed overhead, its lights blinking softly against the dark. I thought about the first trip that never happened. The suitcase, the envelope, the pills. He thought the flight had been canceled. He didn't know another one had already begun, the kind that never leaves the ground, but still reaches the truth. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the soft hum of the house. I wasn't expecting anyone. Grace usually called before dropping by, and Martin never visited unannounced. When I opened the door, Ryan stood there, smiling just enough to unsettle me. "Thought I'd check in," he said, holding a grocery bag. "Elena's visiting her sister, and I figured you might need some company." Company. The word landed oddly. Ryan had never been one for casual visits. I stepped aside, masking my hesitation with a polite smile. "That's thoughtful of you." He walked in, setting the bag on the counter. "I brought dinner. Figured we could cook together. Like old times." "Like old times," I echoed softly, though the warmth in my voice was practiced. As he unpacked the groceries, I noticed how his eyes moved around the kitchen, not just glancing, but scanning. His smile never reached his eyes. I realized then that this wasn't a visit. It was an inspection. We cooked in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the hiss of butter in the pan. Then he said, too casually, "I couldn't find that USB drive I used for our trip paperwork. Did I leave it here?" The air thickened. My hands froze mid-motion over the cutting board. "I don't think so," I said evenly. "Maybe you left it at your office." "Maybe." He stirred the food, the metal spoon clinking against the pot in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "It's strange. I always keep it in my car." I smiled faintly. "Cars lose things too, like people do." He looked at me then, a flicker of something sharp in his expression. Suspicion. Calculation. "You sure you haven't seen it? Silver, small, like this?" He held up a pen to illustrate the size. I shook my head. "No, Ryan." "Why? Important?" "Just some work files," he said too quickly. "Sensitive stuff." We ate dinner in silence. He complimented the food once, almost absently. My mind stayed alert behind every quiet bite. When we finished, he offered to bring the dishes to the sink. Then he wandered, aimlessly at first, then deliberately, his gaze tracing the bookshelves, the hallway, the edges of the study door. I watched from the doorway. "Looking for something?" "Just your old accounting books," he said. "I miss those leather covers. You used to keep everything organized in that cabinet." My throat tightened. That cabinet held the envelope with the USB copies and Martin's documents. "They're still there," I said, forcing calm. "Nothing's changed." He stepped toward the study. I followed, careful to keep my breathing steady. Inside, the light from the window caught dust in slow motion. He moved his hand along the edge of the desk, opening drawers one by one, pretending to reminisce. "You used to keep all my report cards here," he said with a faint smile. "Now it's mostly receipts," I said. He reached for the last drawer, the one I had locked but sometimes forgot to close completely. The metal handle rattled softly. My heart clenched. "Still neat as ever," he said, tugging gently. It didn't open, but it wasn't fully sealed either. He tilted his head, curious. "Mind if I take a look?" "For nostalgia's sake." "Later," I said quickly. "Those drawers stick. You'll break it." He paused, watching me. "You sure?" "Yes. I'll show you another time." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he smiled. That same thin, polite smile I'd seen too many times in business photos online. "All right, Mom. Another time." He stepped back, brushing imaginary dust off his hands. The moment passed, but I felt my pulse in my throat. My hand was still gripping the side of the desk when he turned away. I followed him to the living room, keeping my voice light. "You've been busy lately," I said. "Trying to fix things," he replied. "You worry too much." "I've been told that before." When he left an hour later, I watched from the window as his car pulled away. The moment the taillights disappeared, I locked the door and went straight to the study. The drawer's edge was slightly misaligned. He must have tugged harder than I thought. Inside, everything was untouched, but the air felt different, disturbed, like someone had rearranged the silence itself. I took out the envelope with the USB copies and checked the contents. Both drives were there. Still safe. Still my lifeline. I moved them to a new spot. A hollow space beneath the floorboard under the desk, a place only my husband and I had known about. As I covered it back with the wooden plank, my hands trembled slightly. That night, I sat by the window again. Outside, the moonlight fell across the yard in long, pale lines. Somewhere, a dog barked, then went quiet. I closed my eyes and thought about how close the world had come to, ending in a single careless second. He suspected now. That much was clear. The balance had shifted. I had seen deceit in numbers all my life, but seeing it in flesh, my own flesh, was something else entirely. Still, I wasn't done. He thought he'd come close to the truth, but he hadn't realized how much closer I already was to his. The next morning was unusually bright for late October, sunlight spilling across the kitchen tiles in long, perfect lines. I was making tea when I heard a soft knock at the back door. Not the impatient rhythm Ryan used, but hesitant, like a question. When I opened it, Elena stood there, pale and drawn, her hands clutched around the strap of her purse. "Mrs. Hawthorne," she said quietly, "can I come in?" Her voice was trembling, her eyes rimmed with red. I stepped aside. "Of course, dear. Sit down. You look like you've seen a ghost." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I think I live with one." I poured her tea and set the cup in front of her. The steam rose between us like a veil. She didn't touch it. "Ryan's out?" I asked. She nodded. "He left early. Said he had meetings." I waited. Silence can be an invitation if you hold it long enough. Finally, she whispered, "I need to tell you something." The way she said it, so fragile, like glass cracking, made my heart tighten. "You can," I said softly. Her eyes darted toward the window. "He's in trouble, Mrs. Hawthorne. Real trouble. There are people, men, he owes money to. They started showing up at the house, calling nonstop. He tried to hide it from you, but it's bad." I stayed silent, letting her gather her courage. She gripped her purse tighter. "He said the only way to fix it was to make things right through you, that you'd never suffer, that it would look like an accident." Her words broke on that last line. The room tilted slightly. I forced my breathing steady. "Did he tell you how?" She nodded, a tear slipping free. "He asked me to switch your pills before the trip. He said it was just to help you rest, to make you sleep better on the flight. But when I looked at the bottle, I knew. It wasn't your prescription. It was something stronger." Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse and pulled out a small plastic bottle. "I kept them. I couldn't do it. I told him I replaced them, but I didn't. These are his." The label was nearly identical to mine. Same brand, same dosage, only the tiny code at the bottom differed. I set the bottle on the table without touching it. "Elena," I said softly, "why are you telling me this now?" "Because he's changing," she whispered. He's angry all the time. I can't reason with him. He's not sleeping. He talks to that man, Calvin, late at night. And I hear things. Insurance, claim, documents. I thought he'd stop after the trip was canceled, but now he's worse. And last week, her voice cracked. He pawned your husband's wedding ring, said he'd get it back after everything's settled. I found the receipt in his jacket. For a moment, the air left the room. My husband's ring, his only keepsake, had been in a small box on my dresser for years. The thought of it sitting behind a pawn shop counter made something cold settle in my chest. Elena, I said quietly, does anyone else know about this? She shook her head. No, I didn't know who to trust, but I couldn't keep it in anymore. I nodded slowly, my voice calm even as my pulse roared. You did the right thing coming here. I just don't know what to do, she said, her tears falling freely now. You helped me make it right, I said. That's what you do. I stood and walked to the kitchen drawer, pretending to look for tissues. In truth, my fingers brushed against the small device hidden there. An audio recorder Martin had given me, perfectly legal for a private conversation in Oregon. I turned it on, quietly, as I handed her a tissue. Elena, I said, I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning. Every detail. She took a shuddering breath and began to speak. About the debts, the forged documents, the meetings with Calvin at a coffee shop near Ryan's office. How Ryan grew more controlling, more desperate, until every night felt like walking through glass. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. The story spilled out in full, every lie, every threat, every plan. When she finished, I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. You're safe here, I said. She nodded, crying quietly. I let the silence linger before speaking again. You're going to help me put an end to this, Elena, but we'll do it the right way. Lawfully, quietly. She nodded again, this time with a trace of resolve in her eyes. When she left, I walked her to the door. The sunlight had shifted, falling across her face. She looked lighter, as if confession itself had freed her from something invisible. After she drove away, I closed the door, locked it, and retrieved the recorder. I replayed a few seconds, the tremor in her voice, the clarity of her words. It was enough. Proof, motive, confession. The pieces were aligning. I sent Martin a message. I have her statement. Audio confirmed. Next step? He replied within minutes. Preserve file. Back up. We'll coordinate with Miles for verification. I sat back, staring at the little bottle still on the table. The sunlight hit the label just right, turning it into a glint of gold. I thought of my husband's ring, how something sacred had been reduced to collateral. That night, I placed the recording in the same hidden floorboard where the USB rested. My home had become a vault of truths no one else could carry. Before bed, I looked out at the dark sky, wondering where Ryan was, what lies he was telling himself to sleep. For the first time, I didn't feel fear, only sadness for what he had lost, for what he had become, and for the quiet justice already waiting for him. The next step would not be mercy, it would be order. 2 days after Elena's confession, I found myself standing outside Ryan's house. The morning light was muted, gray with the promise of rain. I had told him I wanted to go over some of his paperwork. His tone on the phone had been cautious but agreeable. I knew he wouldn't refuse. Ryan had always believed he could talk his way out of anything, especially with me. He opened the door, wearing the same easy smile that used to charm teachers, clients, and now, perhaps, himself. "Mom," he said, "you didn't have to come all the way out here. I wanted to. I replied, holding a folder under my arm. You said you'd show me the updated investment forms. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Right, come in. The house smelled faintly of cologne and burnt coffee. Papers were scattered across the dining table, his laptop open, several tabs flashing. The same restlessness that once made him ambitious now made him careless. As he looked for the documents, I glanced around. The living room walls were lined with photos. His graduation, the startup launch, the wedding. But there was nothing of family anymore. No pictures of his father, none of me. Just success stories that no longer existed. He returned with a stack of folders. Here's everything, just some routine updates. I sat down, opened the top folder, and flipped through the pages without reading them. My eyes moved, but my mind wasn't there. I was searching for something else. Something smaller, older, heavier than paper. When he left the room to take a call, I walked toward the office door slightly ajar. Inside, the room was dim except for the glow of a small desk lamp. On the shelf, among the files and books, a familiar glint caught my eye. My breath caught. It was my husband's wedding ring. It sat in a glass dish beside a stack of receipts, a pawn ticket tucked beneath it. The ticket had Ryan's name written in blue ink, dated just a week before the canceled flight. The ring looked almost out of place here, simple gold surrounded by greed and paperwork. I reached out and picked it up. The metal was cold at first, then warm against my skin, as if remembering the years it had spent on my husband's hand. I turned it slowly, reading the tiny engraving inside. Always home. My throat tightened. For a moment, I could almost hear my husband's voice, steady, practical, kind. He used to say that honesty wasn't just about truth. It was about dignity. When people forget who they are, he'd told me once, they start stealing not from others, but from themselves. The sound of footsteps pulled me back. I slipped the ring into my pocket and turned toward the desk. Ryan stepped into the doorway. Looking for something? His voice was calm, too calm. I was just admiring your books, I said. You've always liked keeping records. He smiled faintly, crossing his arms. Old habits. Guess I got that from you. Maybe, I said. Though I always kept mine cleaner. He laughed, but his eyes stayed on me. You sure you're okay, Mom? You seem different lately. I'm fine, I said, matching his smile. Just learning what to keep and what to let go. He tilted his head. That sounds deep. It's just math, I said softly. The numbers have to balance. His expression flickered, uncertain, as if he sensed something he couldn't name. I walked past him, my hand brushing his arm lightly. Thank you for showing me the papers, I said. I'll look them over later. He followed me to the door, still talking about future plans, new investors, possible opportunities. I nodded when appropriate, but didn't really hear him. The ring in my pocket felt heavier with each step. When I reached my car, I sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The betrayal had always been abstract until now. Documents, numbers, insurance. But this was different. This was sacred. My husband's ring wasn't worth much in money, but it was everything in meaning. He hadn't just forged my name. He had pawned memory. That evening, I placed the ring on my desk, next to the USB and the recording. The objects looked ordinary, but together they formed a map of his intentions. Proof not just of deceit, but of what happens when greed erases love. Martin called to check in. Any developments? He asked. Yes, I said. I found the ring. He was silent for a moment, You're sure it's the same one? There's an engraving inside. It's his. Martin sighed. That's not just evidence, Nora. That's motive. He crossed a line he can't uncross. I know, I said quietly. That's why it ends soon. I turned the ring once more before slipping it onto a chain and placing it around my neck. The metal was warm now, resting against my skin like a promise. Later that night, I wrote in my notebook again, under the list I'd started before. 5. Retrieve ring. 6. Prepare second trip plan. 7. Bait the trap. When I put the pen down, I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back wasn't frightened anymore. She was composed, deliberate, and ready. The rain began softly against the glass, steady and rhythmic. It sounded like a heartbeat. Mine, steady now, unwavering. He had taken what was sacred, but I had taken it back. And soon, he would understand what it means when a mother stops forgiving. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The air was still, the kind of quiet that comes before a decision. The ring hung against my collarbone, cool and steady. I touched it once, then stood, already knowing what the day would bring. It was time to act. I began with precision, the way I once prepared financial audits, step by step, nothing left to chance. First, I called Martin. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and alert. I'm ready, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. Good. Miles got the footage, he said. There's a clip from the airport security feed. Ryan meeting a man who matches Calvin Reese's description near the ticketing area. They exchange an envelope. It's short, but it's clear. I exhaled slowly. That's enough to connect them. It is, Martin said. Now we need to document a new incident, something that puts his intent in motion again. If you're going to trap him, make it look like you've let your guard down. I already know how, I said. By mid-morning, I called Grace. Can you help me book another trip? Same airline. Just one ticket this time, under my name. Nothing flashy. Somewhere quiet. She hesitated. You're not really going, are you? No, I said. But Ryan will think I am. She understood immediately. When? Next Friday. I'll need a confirmation email I can forward to him. I'll handle it, she said. And Nora, be careful. I am, I replied. Every move counts. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and typed an email to Ryan, thinking of rescheduling that trip. Grace found a good rate for next week. Might be nice to try again. Just the two of us. It took him only 15 minutes to reply. That sounds perfect, Mom. I'll take care of the details. I stared at his message, the casual tone, the false affection. He still believed I was naive enough to trust him. That belief was his weakness, the crack in the mask he didn't know he wore. That afternoon, Martin came by with a small black folder. Inside were printed copies of every document we'd collected, emails, transfers, recordings, timestamps. I've shared duplicates with Detective Harper Quinn, he said. She's discreet, and she's already briefed. When you give the signal, she'll move. What kind of signal? Simple, he said. You invite Ryan for dinner again. Tell him you're celebrating the new trip. During dinner, you cue the evidence playback. Miles will have everything cued remotely. Quinn and her team will be nearby. I nodded. And Elena? She's ready, Martin said. Grace helped her get temporary housing through a women's support program. She'll testify if needed. I looked at him, gratitude rising quietly. You've done more than I could ever ask. He smiled. You've done the hard part, Nora. You've stayed calm. That evening, I wrote the dinner invitation, keeping it simple. Friday night. Let's celebrate. I'll cook your favorite, roast chicken and apple pie. His reply came within the hour. Wouldn't miss it. Once the message was sent, I stood by the kitchen window, watching the last light fade from the sky. Every detail was in place now. The false trip, the evidence, the law waiting just beyond the horizon. Still, my hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to end. Later, I met with Miles at a small cafe near the airport. He was kind, direct, with eyes that had seen enough human failure to recognize truth when it stood before him. We'll have 2 officers undercover nearby, he said. Detective Quinn will monitor the feed. The moment he makes a move, we'll have cause to intervene. Thank you, I said. He nodded. Grace told me what's been happening. You're doing the right thing. Sometimes the right thing feels cruel, I said softly. Sometimes justice needs to. When I got home, I placed the folder of documents beside the ring and the USB. 3 objects: memory, truth, and proof. My husband's ring caught the light as I passed, throwing a faint reflection against the wall. I paused, letting it settle over the room like a blessing. That night, I cooked in advance, filling the kitchen with the comforting smells of home. I wanted everything to look ordinary. Table set, candles trimmed, the illusion of family restored for one last evening. At midnight, I sent one final text to Martin. Tomorrow is the dinner. Tell Quinn to be ready. He replied simply, We'll be there. I closed my phone and looked around the house. Every shadow seemed sharper, every creak more pronounced. My life had become a stage, and every object in it a prop for the truth. Before going to bed, I stood by the window, the city lights reflecting faintly on the glass. I could see my own face, calm and steady. Behind that reflection, the faint outline of my husband's ring glowed in the low light, a quiet reminder that dignity is never stolen. It's reclaimed. Tomorrow would decide everything. Friday came quietly. The morning light looked harmless, golden, almost tender, but beneath it, the air carried something taut, electric, like a wire stretched too thin. I spent the day preparing, every movement deliberate. The chicken marinated in herbs, the pie cooling on the counter, the table arranged with small care that made everything feel innocent again. I wasn't cooking for comfort this time. I was cooking for closure. Grace called around 4. Miles and Detective Quinn are in position, she said. They'll monitor from the van nearby. Once the signal plays, they move. Good, I said. Tell them not to come early. He needs to see it through. Martin texted next. Remember, steady voice, controlled tone. He'll panic fast. Let him talk himself into the truth. I replied, understood. By 7, the house was ready, candles lit, wine poured, the same linen tablecloth from the last dinner smoothed to perfection. The ring rested around my neck, the flash drive concealed inside the drawer by my chair. I had turned the television to standby mode. One press would play the footage Miles had prepared, a compilation of Ryan's meetings, Calvin's transfer files, Elena's recorded confession. All of it, arranged in sequence, impossible to dispute. When the doorbell rang, the air seemed to hold its breath. I opened it with a practiced smile. Ryan stood there, dressed neatly, a bottle of wine in hand. You really went all out, he said, grinning. It's a special night, I replied. He stepped inside, glancing around. Smells amazing. Maybe we can make this a weekly thing. Maybe, I said. Sit down. I'll bring the food. We ate in polite conversation, just as we always had. Surface words, surface smiles. He complimented the meal, talked about business again, about second chances and rebuilding. I listened, nodding, letting him weave his illusions a little longer. When the plates were cleared, I poured coffee and brought the conversation back to the past. You know, I said, your father used to love nights like this. Simple, quiet, everyone pretending the world was kind. Ryan chuckled softly. He always liked pretending. I looked at him. And you? He hesitated, then smiled. I guess I like winning more than pretending. That's honest, I said. He laughed, mistaking my tone for amusement. Maybe you'll forgive me for the trip fiasco after tonight. I nodded, standing. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk about. He frowned. What do you mean? I pressed the remote. The TV flickered to life. At first, he didn't notice. The soft hum of airport noise, the blurred image of him shaking hands with Calvin near the check-in counter. But when the camera zoomed in, when the envelope passed between them, his fork clattered against the plate. What is this? He said sharply. I said nothing. The next clip played. His emails on screen. The words, "She thinks it's just a trip." Then the recorded voice, Elena's confession, trembling and raw, echoing through the room. He stood abruptly. Turn that off. I stayed seated. No. He stepped forward, reaching for the remote, but I moved faster, pulling the drawer open just enough to show the black folder beneath. It's all there, I said quietly. Every transaction, every forgery, every lie. His voice cracked. You don't know what you're doing, Mom. I know exactly what I'm doing. He reached across the table, grabbing the remote. The coffee spilled, dark liquid spreading like a shadow across the cloth. The TV glowed brighter, the footage still rolling. CCTV timestamps, wire transfers, Calvin's signature. He shouted, You can't prove anything. The front door opened behind him. 2 figures stepped in. Miles first, calm and steady, followed by Detective Harper Quinn, badge in hand. Actually, she said, she already has. Ryan turned, his face pale. What the hell is this? Ryan Hawthorne, Quinn said firmly. You're under arrest for attempted insurance fraud, falsification of documents, and conspiracy to commit financial harm. He backed away, shaking his head. You can't. This is my mother. Yes, I said softly. And you tried to make me your investment. He froze, the words cutting through his last defense. Miles moved forward, handcuffing him gently but firmly. As they led him toward the door, he looked at me, eyes wild, desperate. Mom, please. I didn't mean. I shook my head. You did. He stopped struggling then. His shoulders slumped. For a brief moment, the boy he once was flickered through. The boy who built paper airplanes on our porch, who asked if love could run out like batteries. As they stepped outside, the sirens remained silent by design. No spectacle, just consequence. I stood alone in the quiet afterward, the candle flames trembling slightly in the breeze from the open door. The house smelled of coffee, wax, and the faint metallic trace of fear. Martin entered a few minutes later, his expression grave but gentle. It's done, he said. Yes, I whispered. It's done. He glanced at the TV, still paused on the image of Ryan handing over the envelope. You want me to turn it off? I looked at it for a moment longer. No, leave it. I want to remember how truth looks when it finally stands still. He nodded, resting a hand on my shoulder before leaving me to the silence. I sat back down at the table, my eyes tracing the spill of coffee drying across the cloth. It looked like a map of all the places love had gone wrong, then found its way back again. For a long time, I didn't move. Justice hadn't shouted that night. It had whispered, through paperwork, through patience, through proof. And for the first time in years, the house felt balanced. The morning after the arrest, I woke to silence. Not the tense, watchful silence that had filled my days before, but a softer kind, the kind that exists when a storm has finally passed. The sunlight felt different. It no longer seemed to accuse. It simply entered the room, touching everything gently, as if reminding me that the world had survived the night. I made coffee the way I always had, one scoop too strong. Old habits. Outside, the driveway was empty except for the faint marks where the police cars had been. For a moment, I stood at the window and wondered if the neighbors had seen. Maybe they had. Maybe they hadn't. It didn't matter anymore. Truth has its own gravity. It lands where it must. The phone rang mid-morning. Detective Harper Quinn's voice was brisk but kind. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I wanted to update you. We processed your son's and Calvin Reese's devices. The evidence you and Martin collected, well, it broke the case wide open." I closed my eyes. "You found more?" "Much more," she said. Calvin wasn't just helping Ryan. He was part of an organized fraud network. They targeted older clients through false investment programs and travel insurance scams. Your case will probably lead to 6 more arrests. My hand tightened around the mug. "How many victims?" "Too many," she said softly. "But thanks to your documentation, the district attorney's office now has enough to charge them under the federal elder exploitation statute." Ryan's involvement wasn't isolated. His company's accounts show multiple transfers, one to a holding company that funded Calvin's operations. I didn't speak. Words felt too small for the weight of it. Quinn continued. "Elena's cooperating fully. Her statement matched your recording exactly. That helped us get the warrant for Calvin. He tried to flee this morning but was caught at the state line." I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "And Ryan?" "He's in county custody," she said. "The prosecutor will likely offer a deal if he testifies against the others. But the charges against him will stand." "I see." Quinn hesitated. "I've worked a lot of cases like this, but I've never seen one where the victim built the investigation better than we could have." I smiled faintly. Old accountants never retire. We just move the numbers from paper to people. She chuckled softly. "If you ever get tired of retirement, the department could use someone like you." When the call ended, I sat for a while, letting the silence settle again. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something quieter, like the ache after a long run, the kind that tells you you've survived. Later that week, I attended the preliminary hearing. The courtroom was cool, impersonal. Ryan sat at the defense table, wearing the same gray suit he used for business meetings. He didn't look up when I entered. His hands were folded tightly, knuckles white. Calvin sat beside his attorney, eyes flat, calculating even now. It struck me that greed has a single expression. It never changes, whether it's counting coins or consequences. When the prosecutor presented the evidence, the room grew still. The footage played on the screen. The handshake, the envelope, the email threads. The recording of Elena's voice filled the room. Ryan's head dropped, his hands trembling slightly. The judge reviewed the documents, his tone neutral but heavy. "The evidence is substantial. Bail denied." When it was over, I stood to leave. Ryan turned slightly, his eyes finding mine for the first time. There was no anger there anymore, only something hollow, like the echo of a man realizing he had become the very thing he once feared. I didn't look away. I owed him that much truth. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of rain. Martin was waiting near the steps, holding an umbrella. "You all right?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Just tired." He nodded. "Grace and I were talking. We'd like to help you set up something with the settlement. A foundation maybe, for victims like you, to use the restitution funds constructively." I looked at him, surprised. "A foundation?" He smiled faintly. "You always believed numbers could serve people. Maybe they finally can." The thought settled into me like warmth after cold. "Yes," I said slowly. "Hawthorne Trust. It should help others find their way back to balance." A week later, the newspapers carried the story. Elder Fraud Network exposed through family investigation. My name wasn't mentioned, just a retired accountant who uncovered a multi-state scheme. That was enough. I didn't need recognition. I had the truth. At home, the days began to feel ordinary again. I cleaned the kitchen, replanted the roses, and sorted through years of unused paperwork. The house no longer felt like a witness. It felt like a place to start over. When Grace visited, she brought pastries and her usual humor. "You realize," she said, "you've turned an insurance scam into a public service announcement." I laughed quietly. "That wasn't the plan." "No," she said, smiling. "But it worked." Elena wrote from her recovery program a week later. Her letter was short, handwritten, the pen strokes uneven but sincere. "Thank you for saving me when I didn't deserve saving. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be better than my silence." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, next to the USB and the ring. Not as evidence anymore, but as reminders of what was lost, what was found, and what was reclaimed. When the evening came, I walked outside. The air was cool, the first stars faint but visible. Somewhere in the distance, a plane passed overhead, the sound low and steady. I looked up and whispered, "We're all free now." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. 3 months passed before the first letter arrived. It was thick, folded neatly, addressed in Ryan's handwriting, the same handwriting that once filled birthday cards and school permission slips. For a long time, I just stared at it. The envelope sat on the table beside my coffee cup, the morning light crawling slowly across its surface. I wasn't ready to open it, but I knew I would. When I finally did, the paper crackled softly, like it was reluctant to release its words. "Mom," it began, "I've spent every day in here trying to find the right way to apologize, and I still don't think there is one. I told myself I did everything for the family, but that's not true. I did it for me. I was drowning, and instead of asking for help, I tried to pull you under with me. I see that now." I paused. The ink had smudged slightly near the bottom of the page, a mark where a tear had fallen, or maybe sweat. They gave me a chance to cooperate. I told them everything about Calvin, about the accounts, about the policies. I know it won't erase what I did. I just hope, someday, you'll remember the better parts of me, the ones you raised, not the ones I became. If there's any mercy left in you, Mom, don't forget that you once loved me. He didn't sign it, "Love Ryan," just Ryan, a name unanchored, no longer connected to anything but its own regret. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. My tea had gone cold. For a while, I just sat there, the sound of the clock ticking through the silence. Later that afternoon, I went to the attic to sort through some old boxes. Dust floated in the sunlight, soft and weightless. I found an old cassette recorder, one my husband used to use for dictations. When I pressed play out of curiosity, I heard static. And then, unexpectedly, a voice. A child's voice. "Mom, don't forget my suitcase. I packed my socks this time." I froze. The sound was Ryan's, no older than 7 or 8, laughing between the words. Then my husband's voice followed, warm and amused. "You packed the socks but forgot the toothbrush again, champ." Ryan giggled. "You always remember it for me." My husband's voice softened. "That's what parents do. We remember the things our kids forget." The tape clicked off. I sat back, the tears coming before I could stop them. That one line, "Don't forget my suitcase," echoed through the room, twisting through the months that had led us here. The suitcase, the envelope, the pills, the flight I never took. And now, this, an echo from when the world was still whole. I pressed the tape to my chest, eyes closed. "I didn't forget, sweetheart," I whispered. "I just finally unpacked it." That night, I took out Ryan's letter again. I read it under the soft light of the living room lamp. Then, slowly, I placed it in a small wooden box along with the cassette and my husband's ring. I didn't burn it. I didn't destroy it. I simply gave it a place, contained, acknowledged, but not forgiven. The phone buzzed once before midnight. A message from Elena. A picture of her standing in front of a community center, smiling faintly, the caption reading, "Day 40, still clean, still grateful." I smiled and sent back a short reply. "Keep going. Light always remembers its way home." When I set the phone down, the house was silent again. But it wasn't the heavy silence from before. It was gentler now, like the quiet after prayer. I turned off the lights and walked to the window. Outside, the moonlight poured over the yard, silvering the leaves, softening every edge. The air carried the faint hum of a distant plane, low and steady. I remembered my husband's voice again, the one that lived between sleep and memory. "If they ever make you doubt yourself, remember who you are." For months, I had lived by that voice, building justice from its echoes. And now, as I stood there, I realized it had done more than save me. It had brought me back to myself. The letter remained on the table, unopened now, but not unseen. It would stay there until the paper yellowed, until time did what it always does, turn pain into memory and memory into peace. Before I went to bed, I whispered into the quiet, "I remember you, Ryan, but I also remember me." Then I turned off the light. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the same terminal where everything had once fallen apart. The sound of rolling suitcases, the echo of footsteps, the muted calls over the loudspeaker. It all felt strangely familiar, like walking back into a dream that had finally lost its power. I wore the same coat I had on that morning, the day the suitcase slipped open and the world tilted. But this time, my steps were lighter. The air no longer carried the sharp taste of dread. Instead, it smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel, of movement, of beginnings. In my hand, I held a small carry-on, nothing heavy, nothing that could ever break the way the past had. Inside it were only 3 things: my husband's wedding ring, Elena's postcard, and a folded note from Grace with my boarding pass. I stopped for a moment at the security line. The agent looked up, smiled politely. "Traveling alone today, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, for the first time in a long time. He nodded and gestured me forward. The scanner beeped softly, then cleared. I passed through without looking back. As I walked toward the gate, The overhead lights shimmered against the polished floor, casting soft reflections that moved beneath my feet. Every sound, rolling wheels, boarding calls, laughter, felt like proof that life continues, no matter who tries to stop it. I found a quiet seat by the window. Outside, a plane lifted into the sky, slow at first, then certain. I thought about how different this place felt now. Not a sight of danger, but of choice. I wasn't fleeing anything anymore. I was flying towards something new. Grace's call came through just as the boarding announcement began. "You all set?" she asked. "I am," I said, smiling. "Everything's in order." "I got the final papers from Martin," she said. "The Hawthorne Trust is officially registered. First outreach event is next week. You'd be proud. There's already a waiting list of families who'll get help with fraud recovery." My heart softened. "He'd be proud too," I said quietly. "Where are you headed again?" "Seattle first," I said. "Then maybe somewhere I haven't been before. I'll decide when I get there." Grace laughed softly. "That's a new Nora I'm hearing." "Maybe it's the real one," I said. After the call ended, I looked down at the ring resting in my palm. I had worn it around my neck every day since the trial, but today I slipped it back onto my finger. It felt right there, warm, familiar, alive again. A child nearby laughed, tugging at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the planes. The sound made me smile. For a moment, I remembered Ryan's laughter at that same age, the way he once saw every flight as magic. I didn't try to push the memory away. Some things are meant to stay, even if they ache. When the gate agent called my group, I stood, gathering my bag. The final boarding call echoed softly across the terminal. As I walked down the jet bridge, the hum of engines grew louder, steadier. I paused before stepping onto the plane, my hand resting on the doorframe, and whispered, "I canceled the flight once to survive. Today, I fly to live." The words came out calm, steady, without tremor. Inside, I found my seat by the window. The cabin was quiet, filled with the faint murmur of strangers. I buckled my seatbelt, pressed my hand over the ring, and closed my eyes as the engines began to rise in pitch. Outside, the ground moved slowly away, the airport shrinking into a patchwork of light. Clouds gathered ahead, soft and white, the kind that once frightened me. But this time, I smiled as we lifted through them, into open air. As the plane steadied, I opened the small window shade. Sunlight poured in, spilling across my lap. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded photograph, the first one taken for the foundation launch. In it, Grace and Martin stood beside a group of smiling seniors, each holding a card that read, "It's never too late." I traced the words with my fingertip, then looked out at the sky again. Somewhere below, people were starting their mornings, buying coffee, answering phones, making plans. Somewhere else, Elena was volunteering at the recovery center, still writing her daily notes of gratitude. Somewhere in a quiet office, Ryan was serving his sentence, perhaps learning, at last, the arithmetic of consequence. And here I was, 68 years old, carrying nothing but truth and forgiveness in a suitcase barely half full. The plane banked gently toward the horizon. The clouds broke apart, revealing sunlight like liquid gold. I leaned my head against the glass, feeling the hum beneath it. The same hum that had once terrified me, now turned into comfort. I whispered, "We're home," though I wasn't sure who I was speaking to, my husband, myself, or the woman I had become in the process. The sky stretched endless and blue. Below it, the world looked peaceful again. And as the engines carried me forward, I realized something simple, something unshakable. Justice can be quiet. Forgiveness can be earned. And even after betrayal, life still takes flight. Fade not to black, but to light.